Blender, as you know, is a general-purpose 3D software, meaning it does many things. And one of those many things is sculpting. One of the best things Blender developers did is take inspiration from the best out there. Of course, I'm talking about Zbrush. So today I will go with you over the most important Blender features, tools and brushes that were in Zbrush before they became available in Blender. Before we continue, I want to let you guys know that if you want to improve your sculpting experience in Blender, you will find in the description of this video a list of some of the best add-ons and brushes out there for sculpting in Blender. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Blender's first sculpting mode debuted in version 2.43 in early 2007, introducing multi-resolution mesh sculpting. This allowed Blender artists at the time to subdivide a mesh and sculpt high poly detail on top of a lower poly base. Much like Zbrush's established multi-level subdivision sculpting workflow, you could push and pull geometry with brushes like draw, smooth, grab, etc. Similar to how Zbrush had been letting modelers sculpt digital clay in the early 2000s. This feature clearly took inspiration from Zbrush, which had pioneered high-detail digital sculpting for almost a decade at that point. And this allowed Blender to finally join the sculpting game with, I would say, comparable tools and workflows. By 2012, Blender gained the ability to mask in Sculpt mode, which is a long-standing staple of Zbrush. Sculpt masking officially added around Blender 2.64, and this lets you paint a mask to protect parts of the model from being altered by brushes. In practice, it works just like Zbrush's masking. You can hold Ctrl to paint a mask on your sculpt, and invert or clean it as needed. And this was actually a big quality of life addition, because it allowed you to isolate details like eyes or teeth and avoid warping them while sculpting other areas, mirroring a technique Zbrush artists actually employed and used for many years. Blender 0.66 introduced dynamic topology sculpting, also known as Dyntopo, which dynamically tessellates the mesh during sculpting. Instead of moving existing vertices, Blender could now subdivide local areas on the fly to add details where needed, which is a concept popularized by tools such as Sculptress, which was, by the way, in turn later integrated into Zbrush as Sculptress Pro Mode. I actually made a whole video about this if you want to check it out. Anyway, this meant you no longer had to pre-subdivide a dense mesh. You could just start with a simple shape and draw out new forms like clay, and Blender would add geometry under the brush. It is similar in spirit to Zbrush's Dynamesh feature. As I said, lets you remesh geometry to avoid stretch polys, and it lets you freely explore shapes. And this tool called Dynamic Topology gave Blender sculptors a taste of that freedom, which is now a really important part of sculpting in Blender. Blender 0.81 was a major overhaul of the sculpting toolset, adding several features long enjoyed by Zbrush users. First of all, it introduced a one-click voxel remesh, which instantly rebuilds the mesh into a uniform topology. This is essentially Blender's answer to Zbrush Dynamesh, allowing you to unify and refine topology mid-sculpt, so you can keep sculpting without stretched polygons. Just like Dynamesh, Blender's voxel remesh projects the model onto a new evenly distributed volume grid, which is great for concepting shapes and then remeshing to continue adding detail. This version of Blender also added the automatic quadriflow remesher to generate cleaner all-quad topology. This tackles the same problem as Zbrush's Z-remesher for auto topology. While quadriflow wasn't quite as advanced as Z-remesher, it showed Blender following Zbrush's lead in providing an automated way to turn a high poly sculpt into a cleaner quad mesh, which is useful for animation or further detailing. Also, a brand new pose brush arrived in this version, letting you pose parts of your sculpt as if they are an armature, and this tool automatically creates virtual deformed bones when you drag the brush, so you can bend a limb or pivot the character's torso in one stroke. And this is clearly inspired by Zbrush's transpose tool, or Gizmo, which for years allowed ZBrush users to mask and rotate limbs to reposition a sculpt. In Blender's case, the pose brush made it effortless to click and pose a model without rigging, so you simply drag and the mesh deforms with an IK-like falloff. This was a huge workflow boost actually, mimicking what ZBrush artists had been doing to test character poses. Blender 2.81 also enabled the use of familiar translate, rotate, and scale gizmos within Sculpt mode, so you could mask part of your model and then grab the Move and Rotate tool to reposition it, much like using ZBrush's gizmo or transpose line, or a mask subtool. As you can see, this integration of basic transform operations in the Sculpt mode, of course with respect to sculpt symmetry and masking, was another nod to ZBrush workflows, making Blender sculpting way better. Also, this version added a draw shape brush, which behaves like the regular draw brush, but with a sharper pinch falloff. It allows you to carve crisp creases and wrinkles onto the surface. The community immediately linked this to ZBrush's famous Damn Standard brush, short for Damien Standard, which is the go-to tool in ZBrush for sharp detailing. Draw Shape gave Blender an equivalent tool to cut fine lines and deep folds with a nice sharp profile, which is ideal for things like skin wrinkles, cloth seams, or panel lines. Another addition was Elastic Deform Brush, which lets you grab and twist large portions of the model while preserving volume. So instead of the usual grab that can feel like stretching rubber, Elastic Deform behaves more like bending an object made of clay, because it maintained the thickness and mass of the form. This was based on Pixar research paper about physically plausible elastic deformations. ZBrush doesn't have this exact brush, because it was a novel implementation, but it overlaps with what ZBrush's Move and Snake Hook brushes can achieve, with the bonus of volume preservation. So as you can see, Blender 2.81 was a massive update, aligning Blender sculpting more closely with ZBrush's power and abilities, which is a compliment in my opinion. Blender 2.82 continued the rapid development of sculpting tools, introducing new notable features, which mirror concepts from ZBrush. For example, there is a new multi-plane scrape brush. This new brush extends the idea of Blender's existing flatten tool by scraping from two sides at once to create a crisp edge. In practice, it can cut a sharp ridge or valley into the surface, so imagine flattening two planes that meet at a sharp angle. This is actually reminiscent of ZBrush hard surface trim and polish brushes, like Trim Dynamics and H-Polish, which lets you quickly plane off areas of the sculpt. This brush made it easier to sculpt sharp edges and mechanical forms in Blender, much like ZBrush's polish and trim brushes, which have long been used for this purpose. Blender 2.82 also added a Slide Relax tool, which allows you to slide vertices around the surface without changing the shape, or to relax the mesh topology in an area. In fact, this can smooth out irregular geometry while preserving the overall form. As a ZBrush user, you can perform similar relaxation operations using features like ZRemesher's guides, or by toggling alternate smoothing modes to even out topology. Blender Slide Relax made it possible to clean out topology on the fly, which is especially handy, I would say, after remeshing, similar to how one might relax geometry after a Dynamesh in ZBrush. In this version, there's also the ability to slice a mesh, along a mask that is, and even extract the mask option as a separate object. This is analogous to ZBrush's Mesh Extract and Split functions. In ZBrush, you can mask an area, for example, a character's clothing shape, hit Extract, and get a new subtool with that shape, or you can hide parts and split them into a new mesh. Blender's implementation lets you do the same thing. For instance, mask out a section and convert it into a new mesh. This is useful, I would say, for modeling armor or clothing, or maybe cut away masked parts and fill the hole. And I think this clearly takes a page of ZBrush's book, where extracting from masks is a common workflow for creating accessories or new parts from an existing sculpt. On the other hand, in 2020, Blender 2.83 introduced face sets, which was a game-changing feature for sculpt organization that directly mirrors ZBrush's Polygroup system. Face sets let you define colored regions on your sculpt that can be easily hidden, shown, or masked as a unit. In Blender Sculpt mode, you could paint face sets or create them from mesh attributes like material slots, seams, etc., and then use them to isolate areas without affecting others. This is exactly how Zbrush polygroups have been used for years, dividing a complex model into manageable sections that you can work on independently or use to control visibility. Even Blender developers acknowledge the similarity, like polygroups' face sets are color-coded and can preserve their boundaries through remeshing operations, and this addition made it much easier for Blender artists to handle complex sculpts, clearly drawing inspiration from Zbrush's solution to the same problem of managing sculpt pieces. Blender 83 also included a rewrite of the Multiresolution modifier to improve its reliability. Multires, which is Blender version of multi-level subdivision sculpting, had been less stable compared to Zbrush's subdivision workflow, so in version 2.83, many of those issues were addressed, reducing artifacts when subdividing, and bringing Blender's multi-resolution sculpting closer to Zbrush's gold standard implementation, on different subdivision levels. But these are not the only examples, because we had additional sculpting tools that kinda went in parallel with Zbrush features, like the added cloth brush, which arrived around the same time Zbrush introduced cloth dynamics, and the clay thumb brush, which mimics the effect of pressing clay with your thumb, in addition to other things. And there you have it, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, please subscribe to the channel to receive more videos like this. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.